Okay, well, thank you for listening. This is Artist Talk with LVA and the show produced by Little Vis Art. I'm the host, Keith Waits, and we're talking today with Amber Estes Theineman. There's an exhibit called Wind Sings the Songs, new works from Amber Estes Theineman that is now open at Grady Goods, a new locally owned retail business at 620 Baxter Avenue, owned by our friend Jay Grady. Amber is a visual artist and a musician, and so welcome, Amber.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you're welcome. So I have seen you sing, and I have seen your artwork, so I know a little bit about what you do. But let's talk about the work that's in Grady Goods right now. Tell what would you want people to know if they haven't come? Like, what would you want them to know coming into the space to look at your work?
Sure. The work that is up right now in Grady Goods is really meditative line drawings. So it's a lot of lines happening over different size pieces. You know, I have some large canvases where I used acrylic paints and kind of created more of an abstract color scenes that depict, it could be landscapes or spacescapes, seascapes, whatever you see in it, whatever the viewer sees in it. And then lines that are just drawn on top of it. So the whole process of this show really was to be in the present moment and really focus on just being disciplined with lines.
Well, so you're actually painting or drawing each line very deliberately. There's no special magical tool you're using.
No, everything is hand drawn.
So when you talk about meditative, I can easily imagine how do you get lost a little bit in that? The more you're working, do you find yourself, is it a meditative state you achieve?
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons that I started doing line work was actually during the pandemic. I started with collage and just kind of drawing lines around collages, and then it has kind of evolved into this. And I don't necessarily always have a plan for the finished piece because I rely so much on wherever the line goes. So it's almost like at some point, like I might say, okay, I'm going to fill this entire canvas, and that's kind of where my plan ends, or I'm going to fill, a shape. But beyond that, it's always kind of a surprise to me at the end because I do get lost in it, and I just kind of let the line lead me instead of the other way around.
This is a very common idea I find in visual art, the way that the artists are led by medium or material, that they know the beginning of the journey of a piece, but not the end of the journey of the piece.
Right.
Which kind of leads into, not to sound trite, but it's the old thing of like, it's the journey, not the destination. That is
right.
But I definitely look at some of the work and I see what seems to be abstraction. And then there's some of it that seems very clearly to be sort of a landscape. Now, do you know when you say you start a piece and you don't know where the lines are going to go,
Right.
do you have a sense that, well, this will be I'm thinking about landscapes? Is that in your head? Does it emerge and you understand that as you go?
It usually will emerge, and I understand that as I go. So, in some of the pieces, especially when I'm using things like coffee or inks, where I'm just like pouring things, I have I really have very little control over what is happening. And then I sort of just spend some time with it before I decide on where the lines might go. And then, yes, throughout that process, I'm like, okay, this is kind of feeling more like a landscape, or this is feeling, I don't know, it reminds me of water or something like that.
It's interesting you said coffee as an ingredient, because it's become actually a very common ingredient in the last several years. Daniel Falsgraf and Penny Sisto and all sorts of people use coffee like the stain effect.
Yes.
So have you ever gotten into a piece though and just said, nah, I didn't care where this went at all?
Um, well, what do you mean? Like I got
Like,
finished with the piece and then I was like, I
yeah,
really
are
don't
you
love it.
are you always happy with how that journey plays out, or are there
No.
times when it kind of takes a left turn or something?
Yes, definitely. Actually, one of the pieces that's in the show, I completely finished. It was a really large canvas, and I completely covered it with lines. I mean, it was like hours and hours of work. And when it was finished, I just did not like it. I didn't have, I didn't feel like there was a connection with it, and I I just I wasn't satisfied with it at all. So I was just like, okay, well, this is just I'm gonna paint over it. And it was a little bit painful because of, the time that you spend, but at the same time, I knew I was not ever gonna be happy with it. So I was like, okay, then and this is yeah.
Well, at that point, then when if you go back into rework a piece, are you
Mhm.
being more deliberate and less meditative, or are you able to sort of drop back into the meditative state?
So I think it's a combination of both of those things. It's more deliberate in terms of like if I didn't like the color choices that I made,
Mhm.
I'm deciding on what needs to change with that. Um, and then how much of the piece do I want to fill, So if I didn't like filling the entire piece or the color choices that I made, then those are deliberate decisions that I'm making. But once the line work starts, um, I'm really able to just kind of zone into that and get back into that.
And you do make choices about the material or maybe the color or things like that when you're starting a piece before you sort of let go, I guess, if that's a
Yes.
fair.
Yeah.
It's what, because I see there are certain kinds of ways of making art. I don't want to get into being judgy, but I watched a video the other day of a person doing something where it's about letting material medium drop onto a spinning thing, and I think it's kind of interesting, but I also feel like there's too much left to random chance. But it's interesting. So I'm always interested in this sort of balance, or even um sometimes it's a conflict, within an artist's practice of how much is choice and how much is, as you were talking about, like following your medium, or getting into
Mhm.
that meditative state. And I don't mean to suggest that it's invalid, or anything like that, but it's just like there's that balance between the artist's hand, the artist's decision, and the artist giving themselves over to a process.
Right.
Do you think much about that when you do it?
Um, hmm. I guess not really. I mean, I think that with with the lines, picking a starting point too is really important, and then deciding, um also, like, I use gel pens a lot actually, which it's just they flow so easily on canvas, and so um that like size line is really nice. But I also experiment with different size. I'll use India ink, or if I'm working with paper instead, then I'll use different micron pens. um I guess I'm kind of getting away from the question that you asked.
Well, and maybe the question is kind of, no, you don't think about it very much.
Yeah.
You're giving yourself over to it.
Right.
What became first for you as an artist musician? Were you doing did you do music and then get into visual art, or did you do visual art and then get into music, or were they sort of simultaneous developments?
I think that, music has always been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And so I've always sung, and then I learned how to play the piano at a pretty young age. And but I've also always enjoyed art. So I think that visual art, I should say, visual art maybe came a little bit after music, but they've always kind of been there simultaneously throughout my life.
Did you formally study music? Like
I
what
I
did you,
did.
yeah.
Yes. I studied at Bellarmine University.
Because I'm thinking about, so are the two creative disciplines extremely different for you, or are they or is there a relationship?
I think there's a relationship, but with music, I feel like typically I'm creating with someone, whether that's, a band with multiple people in it or just one other collaborator, but it's more of a conversation with another person and what they're kind of bringing and what I'm bringing and kind of layering in a different way. Whereas with visual art, it's, of course it can be collaborative too, but I feel like it's a more solitary practice for me personally. And so those two things, I feel like there are seasons that I kind of go through where I need one maybe more than the other. And they do feed off of each other, but they are different in those ways.
Because I think you talk about collaboration, but even when you're working alone, and I'm not a musician and I didn't study music, so I don't sit at a piano finding notes and writing down, it's a cliche, right? Like in a movie, if you want to show a composer,
Right.
they're either finding notes on a piano or they're working it out on a guitar, and then they reach over and write stuff down or whatever, in the same way, then a writer is always shown like at the typewriter with a glass of whiskey. Though these are the sort of days of how artists are depicted. But it seems like there's a much more deliberate sort of maybe even struggle with music, even if the result is harmonious. But I don't mean to be trying to manufacture something, but this is what I'm wondering about is like, so there's a big difference in the two disciplines, so that the way you are so isolated and meditative when you're creating visual art. Do you ever have that sort of meditative aspect when you're creating music, or is extremely different?
I think there is that aspect absolutely with music. I think there is more struggle and kind of back and forth whenever you're writing something. So it can be a bit more challenging in that space. But again, there's also times where it just comes really naturally and you do get lost in it. To I think it is easy to get lost in music, whether that be in performance, once you have decided, you've made all these decisions about what the piece is going to be and how it's going to sound, and you've practiced it, but then you're at this place where you're really comfortable with it, and you can kind of just get in the zone and lose yourself in that. So I think in that way, it is very similar, but with music, that process, it may take a little bit more time to get there, I guess. For me, that's not for everybody. I mean, I feel like it's also dependent upon kind of what type of music you do. Like with jazz improvisation, that's all about kind of reaching this other plane and discovering
Right.
something new every time.
Well, how would you describe the kind of music you make? Is it folk music? Is it folk based, or?
Um, I think you could say that there's a folk element to it for sure. It's very, it's very melodic. It's very, I'm always not great with words and describing music. I guess that's part of the reason that I do it. But yeah, I mean, I like for people to be like, just figure it out for yourself what you think.
Well, in my experience, what I heard you perform once with the trio, the name of the trio was
Oh yes, with Tamerlane Trio.
Tamerlane Trio, uh,
Yes.
at the Fraser Museum, was, I would say it's kind of folk. It sort of seemed to touch base with traditional music from the past.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
It was part of the mission. I guess the music was placed in a context of performances of work by Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
So it seemed to harken back, if not exactly to the period when Poe was writing, it seemed to sound as if it did,
Yes. Yes, definitely.
which is folk music. I mean, I think, and this is the problem. I run into this all the time because it's a radio show. You try to find language to describe things, but I find that a lot when we're talking about art, words have a tendency to nail down expectation. So
Yes.
you take folk music and everybody immediately pictures, a white guy with a shag haircut and a guitar, you
Right.
know, lead singer or something. It's like there's a very specific sort of image. But I think
Right.
folk really is broad enough to mean that it's anything that finds a foothold in a place and time in history.
Sure.
That sort of makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, again, I'm not a musicologist, but I think when we talk about like how, let's say, we talk about mountain music, which is a kind of folk music, and it's called mountain music because it came out of the Appalachian Mountains, and it
Right.
was, and you might know a lot more about this. I might be betraying my ignorance, but music that developed at a time when there was no mass media. There might have been a radio, possibly, but a lot of times it was just, this is what people did. It was like the local entertainment,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
You learned songs from somebody, and nobody knew where they came from, and they got passed along and changed, and all these things happened. But it really came out of the community, and it was the voice of a certain kind of community and culture at a certain place and time. And for
Yeah.
me, I think there's a line to rap music coming out of inner city neighborhoods later, because it's the same thing. It's a voice coming out of a place and time and the people and culture of those neighborhoods that
Right.
cannot come from anywhere else.
Right.
And I think all of that is folk music. So I think nobody would ever say rap music was folk music, probably, but I think it really develops in the same way.
Sure. Yeah, that's really interesting way to think about it, and that makes total sense.
So and I think it's a lot about storytelling too.
Yeah.
Both of those things that I just talked about. So
Mhm.
when you're talking about music, are you a storyteller?
Um, yes and no. I think that my process with writing music, and especially with lyric writing, which I always feel like I struggle with lyrics. One of the reasons that I love art and that I love music is because I don't necessarily have to have words to go with it. But I think, yes, there is always an element of storytelling um, within certain songs. But I think sometimes it also works out to be more like a collage or a poem or something that maybe less of a story that you're telling and more maybe a little bit more disjointed, but have an overall theme. If that makes sense.
Sure. Well, a lot of folk music is, I mean, there's a real connection there with poetry. Obviously, when we talk about Bob Dylan, but a lot of other writers, um, that sometimes there are overt stories, but even when you're not having a specific narrative, I think you're still telling a story.
Sure.
So you've been very collaborative with your music. Do you tend to not be the lyric writer, or other people doing that? Or it sounds like you've done both, but
Yes.
are you more comfortable with the music part of it?
I would say that I'm more comfortable with the music part, and I've been in projects where somebody else has written lyrics, and the project that I'm in now, though, I'm primarily writing lyrics. Um, I would say typically the music comes first, and then the lyrics come after. I know different people write music in different ways, so that they might come up with whatever the song's going to be about first, and then they have lyrics, and then they come up with a melody that goes with what they've already written lyric wise. But I find, for myself anyway, it has to, the music comes first, and then I fit words into kind of that framework.
Do you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea for phrases or whatever and write them down?
Sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes I do. Not always, but that does happen.
What instruments do you play?
I play piano and I sing. So
No guitar or
no,
auto harp or anything like that?
I mean, I have played auto harp, but it's been a while since I've done that. I would say primarily I do piano, keys. Yeah.
I was watching an old, I sometimes, you go down a rabbit hole with YouTube, and I caught June Carter Cash on the Johnny Carson show without Johnny Cash, and she played the auto harp.
Yeah.
And I don't know when the last time was I watched somebody play it, and they were doing a close-up of her playing this instrumental piece. And it was interesting because, and I know, again, this is radio, but you sort of imagine an auto harp has a certain sort of shape to it, and I'm drawing that out for you to see. And I always imagined strumming the long length of the strings, but she was working the short length, which
Mhm.
that the way they're played.
Yes. I mean, I guess you can play them, slightly different ways, but you just you push the buttons for the different chords and then you
Yeah.
strum. I mean, it's very automatic as the name as the name would suggest. But yeah,
But it didn't seem automatic. It seemed both it seemed, I mean, it's, most stringed instruments are two-handed thing.
sure. Yes,
And
yes.
one is about chords and one is about picking. That's a very,
Right,
very simplistic way of breaking it down, but I think everybody understands that. And so that was sort of that way. The buttons were the chords.
right.
It also seemed like such a intimate, sort of tight sort of configuration to be playing
Sure.
the instrument that way, instead of being able to have more space to have an instrument. I don't know. It
Right.
was, but you're not an auto harp expert, but
No,
you,
no, no.
this conversation, you are the auto harp expert. So do you, I mentioned earlier about the relationship between your visual art and your music.
Mhm.
Do you find one influences the other? Like, do you feel like if you're working on a project musically, does it make you think differently or inspire you in some way in what you might take into your visual art practice, and vice versa?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that it probably does. I'm not sure that that's always a conscious thing. Um, I don't have like a specific example of when that, may have happened. Um,
Well, and it may happen, but you don't necessarily track it consciously as an
right,
artist.
exactly, exactly.
You don't come out of a session writing music going like, oh, that makes me want to go make things that look like this.
Right, right. But I do sometimes see things, like while playing music or listening to music. I do sometimes see different things that will inspire I don't know, inspire an artwork, a
Mhm.
visual art piece. Yeah.
Well, and also looking at your work, and I just saw, and I'll say, Jay Grady just not too long ago posted, he made a video looking around the gallery at your show, and there was one point he went really close in on
Yeah.
the this one piece that was, and they were within a circle.
Mhm.
And I remember when he went in that close, they they reminded me of, and I don't know how clearly I can, of a certain sort of computer graphic that existed, that I think it's gone now, but like an earlier stage of computer development, in which lines would graph. I think you see them in like some of the old sci-fi movies from like the 80s and stuff like that, where lines would sort of graph a terrain or whatever. And so
Mhm.
from thinking about this landscape thing. So are you ever aware um, that what you're doing by hand, then you're not a computer, except, we say like we are, like our brain is the original computer or whatever.
Right.
The computers are modeled on our brain, but like you're hitting upon a visual motif that is somehow inherent in the human consciousness. I know, but that sounds really pretentious, but I was just trying to think, like, so if computers were designed to do something this way, and then an artist approaching, not thinking about that thing, ends up doing something similar, are we touching on some sort of universal constant in our experience?
Oh yeah.
Tension.
I no, I think so. I think so. Definitely, because it's all, like it's all influences, right? I mean, whether or not we see it that way. Um,
You don't know everything that's come into your brain throughout your
right,
life, how it's
right.
going.
Yeah, exactly.
Ray Bradbury, who was fascinating to me, and he in an interview once said, he goes like, people say like, how do things come to you? And he goes, I spent 2 years, he said, he spent 2 years in Ireland working on Moby Dick with the filmmaker John Huston. Didn't write anything about being in Ireland. 4 years later, he's sitting at the typewriter, and all of a sudden, he just starts writing these stories set in Ireland. That it was just like it all gets absorbed, and you don't
Mhm.
know when or if it will at all come out, but
Right.
it will come out. That it can come out to you in unexpected ways later on. We're just a sponge in a way.
Yes. Yes.
But your lines tend to go, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but your lines tend to go, I think I see them left to right. I mean, that's just because we look left to right. And I'm assuming you probably draw or paint them left to right. Do you ever, but they don't, they seem to follow a path, but they don't, like, you don't ever have a lot of like conflict, in the sense that if you have lines going horizontally, you don't then bring in lines going vertically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's much more about the flow and trying to keep everything looking more continuous. And I do most of the time go from left to right. Sometimes I will go from right to left, but that's a little that's more rare that I do that, but sometimes I will.
Is it just because you're filling in an area or something like that? And sometimes it's just sort of better, you could sort of meet or something?
I think that I'm trying to think about what, like when I've
Does your
gone.
brain actually switch somehow?
Maybe so. I think sometimes too, with working with bigger pieces, depending on how they're arranged, or if they're on the floor, or if they're on my lap, it's like sometimes it's just easier to go back and forth instead of just like, one direction the entire time.
Right. You have to get over and come in from the bottom right corner
Right.
to fit the piece, and you can't go over the rest of it because it's wet or because you don't want to. So and I'm thinking
Yeah.
maybe that's when I'm getting very practical about this. I was sort of starting with a very metaphysical question, but yeah, and then you just have to get over on that right corner. And it's
Right.
just at that point to bring in from the edge rather than come in from the middle.
Yes. Yes.
So I always try to think about, like, if somebody's listening who's never made anything or like this or whatever, like what they're thinking about it. And I think everything always looks easy, and
Sure.
I think it's really important to emphasize that art is work, and it's physical work, and it's sometimes very. I mean, like, when you talk about a big piece, you're on your elbows and your knees, and your back gets stiff. I mean, it's like
Right.
any kind of a pain sometimes to make art. Um, so let's talk a little bit about, let's think about moving forward. So you've got the show Grady Goods, which is up through June.
Yes.
So at the time that people are hearing this, they'll have about another several days or a week or so, I think, to go check it out.
Yeah.
Do you have any other areas lined up where you will be exhibiting?
Not at the moment. Kind of still working on that and figuring out to what new work is going to be. So I don't have anything coming up after this show.
I know you've been in exhibits with other people, I believe.
Yes.
I think we missed getting you in an interview with Bob Lockhart a few months ago because I think you were traveling or something.
Yes.
You were
Yes.
involved in a show with him, I think. Like,
Yes.
worked in a show with him, maybe at Pyro.
Yeah.
So is this your first solo show?
It is not my first solo show. It is, I guess, the second solo show I've had specifically with the line drawings. I also do photography, and I've had a couple of solo shows with photography. So,
Well, tell me a little bit about the photography.
sure, it is. I really like creating kind of abstract pieces with photography, whether that involves a model or plants in nature, and just kind of like rearranging things or taking out faces or obscuring just different parts of things to make them look I don't know, maybe a little bit more alien or otherworldly. I love exploring motion in photography as well. Um, I find all of that really interesting. And I guess the last photography I had, or photography show that I had was at Revelry. um, and it was called Apparitions. So I worked with a couple of different models, but really used movement and just obscuring faces with, you know, you didn't necessarily know where the figure was, or like I had like plants growing out of bodies and things like that.
So you're doing digital manipulation
Yes,
after?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So interesting, because it's very, that's got a real contrast to the line work.
It
You know,
is, yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to end without talking a little bit more about the music. And I know you're working on something right now. What can you tell us about it?
Sure. So right
'Cause I know
now,
sometimes people don't want to, like, well, we're a little ways away from finishing, but what can you tell us about what you're working
with Fool's Ghost, we are working on some new material, and we're really trying to kind of strip down some things. In our first record, we had lots of different layers. And so we're really focusing on just simplifying things a little bit more and seeing where that goes. We have some new material that's already been written. We have a lot more to continue. So we don't have any live shows coming up soon, but hopefully maybe by the end of the year we'll be playing out somewhere.
Like an album release party, or will it be preview?
No, it'll still be a ways, I think, before a release party happens, but yeah.
Okay. And Fool's Ghost is it's you and your husband.
Yes, yes, correct. Yeah.
And what is his name?
Nick Theineman.
Nick Theineman. Okay.
Mhm.
Just, I know, just what, because I
Yeah.
I hate when people like mention people on radio and be like, well, what did they say about a first name? People say like, oh, Steve, and nobody says like, oh, that is Steve so and so, who is
Right.
this. So it's important. I'm trying to be a good radio host when I say that. So, and you guys have other stuff out. I can just, like, as we're talking, I can even just see here it's that you're on Spotify
Yes.
and all that. So you're out there.
Yeah.
So when was the last release?
That was let's see, 2020, right before the pandemic
Dark
hit.
Woven Light?
Yes, Dark Woven Light was released, and we had a tour planned, of course. All of that, got canceled, and
2020. Yeah.
yes, yes, exactly. So that just, 2020 happened, so everyone knows. But we did a few music videos, and that's really it's really a fun process too, to have the visual element with music, and to do that whole process. Video is much different from other visual art I guess processes, but it was fun.
Well, but have you been able to bring your visual art sensibility to play in the videos, or do you trust other people to do the videos?
I think it's a combination. I think, we definitely have visual ideas, and then bring other people in that are like, that can make it happen. We'll be like, okay, yes, we know what we want this to look like, and we have ideas about, like the location, or kind of where changes might happen. So I feel like we're both very involved in the directing of them as well. It's just not so much in the actual editing part of it, which is, whew, I mean, bless people that
Yeah.
that do video work. It's a lot of time in front of a screen, and
Yeah, and kind of blurry eyes, and
yes.
it's not. I don't have the patience for it. How did you meet your husband? Was it because of music?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. We met while I was in college. So like on Bellarmine's campus, just through mutual friends. And we were friends for a long time, actually, before we started dating. So once we did start dating, it kind of like everything happened really quickly. We were just like, yeah, we're supposed to be together. We already had a solid friendship as a foundation, and yeah.
It sounds like a good recipe. It's you hear that said, but the
Yeah.
most thing is to be really good friends, to be like best friends. And I feel like
Right.
a lot, but very few marriages actually probably start with that sort of foundation,
Sure.
fortunately. So yeah. So
Yeah.
what does he play?
He plays guitar and he plays bass. And he also did a lot of the percussion work like through a software program for we also had some live drums recorded, but he wrote all of those parts on a software program. And then he also plays an instrument called a mellow bar, which is kind of a combination between a guitar and a slide guitar. So he like it's not on a stand, he wears it, but it's like the neck is angled and he slides, he has a slide. I'm not good, I guess, at explaining the
No, I think
mechanics of it, but
well, this is why people should come see your live show, because
yes, exactly.
I think I sort of have a sense of what you're talking about, that it's instead of things being turned facing the audience, they're
Right.
turned perpendicular to the player in the audience.
It's almost like diagonal. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, no, okay. Well, yeah. Now it's a must thing. You got to come.
Oh
You gotta-
yeah.
I'm sure I could look it up. It's a mellow bar. You said
Yes. Mellow bar. Mhm.
sounds like a candy bar.
Right.
But so you guys are kind of a power couple.
Um,
Well, at least not like like worldwide, but like you both you're both multi hyphenates, and that must be because you can do you can do a lot all the. It sounds like you can do almost all the work on this just
right,
between you. You don't have to bring anybody else in until it comes time to edit the video.
right. And recording and yes, but it is nice to have a lot of that just kind of between us because I feel like especially as we get older, it's hard with schedules and kids and people just having lots of things going on. It's kind of harder to keep bands, moving and things like that.
So you have kids?
We have one son who is, yeah, he'll be 12 next month, which is
Oh
hard to
wow!
believe. It's going by so fast.
I was going to assume much younger. So are they playing an instrument?
He got into guitar and bass for a little while, but has kind of moved from that. He's super into running, which we're both kind of like we don't know where this is coming from, but hey, he loves it. So but he also likes art as well. So we're just kind of letting him feel out where he's finding his way.
It's hard not to believe when you grow up in a house with creative parents that you're not going to find a creative outlet,
Sure. Yeah.
But well, I guess though that running is that's his meditation, right?
Oh yeah.
Not a runner either. I'm with you. Talk about that, how you get to that place where
Right.
the pain and exhaustion is sort of goes away for a while and you're in. I mean, I guess it's kind of a Zen thing.
Yeah.
More power to them.
I know.
Well, Amber, thanks for talking to me today. This has been it's a pleasure to get to know you a little bit more. I always that's one of the great things about these interviews is I actually like it when I know not so much about people. Gives us a lot more.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So good luck, and I'll just say again, Wynn sings the songs. Amber's most recent visual art is on display at Grady Goods, owned by our friend Jay Grady. And although I kind of feel like it's a whole family thing, I don't know if they're I don't know if boys are working in there yet. They're a little too young. That's child labor, I guess. But I'm sure they're spending a lot of time there. But it's a new retail operation that has a gallery. So it's a new gallery in town, which we always welcome that. It never seems like there's enough, to show art. So, but also musician, singer, songwriter, all these things. And so look for music from Fool's Gold in maybe a year. You think you're going to have a
Right. Yeah. Hopefully we will see.
But thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.